Welcome back to the Wellness Lab. I'm your host, Nick Palladino-King. This is the show that teaches you how to create your own wellness equation. Here's a question to sit with before we even start. When was the last time something really good happened in your life? And then almost out of nowhere, you got sick, you picked a fight, or you found a way to blow it up. Well, guess what? That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. And my guest today has over 50 years of experience helping people see it, name it, and break through it. I read his book recently and it's transformed my life. Gay Hendricks is a psychologist, an author, and he's a pioneer in the mind-body space. He holds a PhD from Stanford, and he's spent 2 decades as a professor and since coached Fortune 500 executives, trained thousands of people and practitioners in his own workshops with his wife, Kathleen Hendricks, and they've even founded the Hendricks Institute and written over 35 books together. Like the breadth of work, the body of work that this man has compiled is beyond impressive. And it all really comes down to one thing, and that is the book that's changed everything for millions of people, myself included. And that's the book, The Big Leap. If you haven't read it, go get a copy right now. In it, Gay describes the upper limit problem, which we'll discuss today. It's the invisible ceiling that we put above ourselves to prevent ourselves from moving into higher realms of excellence, of abundance, of love, of success, of prosperity. It helps us see it, helps us name it, and develop skills to break through it and continue to upward spiral our lives into more success, abundance, and love. It is beyond inspiring. And this conversation is going to go deep into the mind, into the body, and into what it actually takes to stop playing small, something this podcast is all about. So let's welcome Gay to the show and get ready to have your life transformed through this conscious conversation. All right. Welcome to the Wellness Lab, the podcast that teaches you how to create your own wellness equation. Gay, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you on, and I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Nick.
Absolutely. I've read a bunch of your books. I'm in the coaching space. I've found you to be so inspiring, but I'd love if you could just give a little background for the readers, maybe on, what's gotten you to where you are today. I know that's a very long story, but anything you feel is relevant before we dive into some of the deeper topics of your books.
Yes. Well, I got here in a strange and wonderful way. I think the launch pad for me was having a lot of problems as a kid that I kept gaining weight, and I was the only fat kid in the family where everybody else was skinny, and I was eating the same food they were, and I was getting fat. So I got taken around to all these different medical specialists, and oh man, I got pumped full of shots when I was a kid and took different medications and everything, but it never really got fixed until I took responsibility for fixing it myself at age 24. And I had an enlightenment experience where for the first time in my life at age 24, I was able to see not only my whole history, but what I'd been avoiding dealing with and looking at. I had this amazing experience where for about 2 minutes, it was like the lights got turned on in my body and I could see all the things I was angry about, going back to childhood, and things I was sad about, and my father's death and other things, and things I was scared about. I was scared I was going to die before I reached my potential. And so but I'd never realized those things before. And so it was like turning on a light and seeing them for a couple of minutes. And once I'd seen them, I didn't want to live any other way. I didn't want to live back in a state of darkness. And so I made a decision to do whatever I could do to kind of keep the lights on. And what I started doing was eating different food than I'd ever eaten in my life. I decided, okay, everything up until now has gotten me fat. So I'm going to start just eating things that I've never eaten before that I feel like could feed my new consciousness, keeping the lights on inside me. And so for the first month, I ate nothing but fruits and vegetables, which were 2 things I'd always avoided. I literally grew up in the middle of an orange and grapefruit grove in Florida, and I just never ate fruit. I don't think anybody in my family, and we lived in the middle of it, and I don't think I ever saw my mother eat an orange or a grapefruit. and so it was really weird. Now I'll pay good money to get an organic grapefruit, but then I could have eaten all I wanted. But anyway, I'd avoided all these fruits and vegetables and things and whole grains. And so for the first month, I just ate completely different food. I lived on blueberries and things that I'd never eaten before. Well, I lost 35 pounds in that first month, more than a pound a day. And that led me to my first upper limit problem. Now, in the Big Leap, I should have one here somewhere.
Right behind you.
Oh, okay. Look behind me. You'll see that book, The Big Leap. And one of the two big concepts in The Big Leap is the upper limit problem and how to deal with your own upper limits. And the second big thing is how to find your genius zone and live in your zone of genius all of the time. And so my first upper limit, though, was that after that month of feeling so good and losing all that weight, I kind of almost like went into a trance. I saw some family eating an ice cream sundae in a restaurant, and I was walking past it, and I looked at them, and I just had to have it, and I kind of went into an addictive trance, and I had this ice cream sundae, and for 20 minutes, I felt like the king of the world. All that sugar was pumping through me. But 20 minutes after that, it was like somebody had punched me in the gut. I bent over in the middle of the street. And my stomach was aching more than I'd ever ached in my life. And I realized, wow, I went from feeling great to feeling miserable just as a result of unconsciously eating food. And I started thinking, what other kinds of things do I use to keep myself trapped in my old programming? And that's when I started looking into what actually causes the upper limit problem. And we can talk about this in detail if you'd like, but I discovered there were only 3 or 4 main limiting beliefs that people operate out of that keeps them stuck. And I figured out a way 50 years ago to get unstuck from them. And since then, I've been teaching that. And, Katie and I have been around the world, I think, more than 30 times. If you count up all the miles, we have 2 million frequent flyer miles, whatever that results into. We've been on Oprah several times and other shows and things like that, but always kind of teaching this same message that the way out is always through, to look inside yourself and find the limitations rather than blaming the outside world. Because if you start blaming the outside world, that's a full-time job, because there's a lot of things wrong with the outside world. And if you get into that mindset of thinking, I can't do anything because the way the world is, boy, that's really a quick way to get stuck in life.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much there, and I'm feeling so much energy inside me, and trying to be mindful of which direction to to go. I'm curious, what was that enlightenment moment? Were you doing some type of practice? Were you just walking down the street? Was it God that came in and said, "Hey, wake up"? I mean, that's always such a great moment.
I wish. What actually happened was even stranger. Okay, by the age of 24, I was overweight still. I smoked heavily, 2 or 3 packs of Marlboros a day. I was in a crappy job that I hated. I was working in a school for delinquent boys, and I was kind of a teacher wrangler, I call it, because it was, riding herd on 105 delinquents was a full-time job. But I was also in a very toxic relationship that I'd been in for a year or two, but I couldn't figure out how to get out of it because neither one of us had enough money literally to move into a different apartment. So I was, just about everything that was wrong with my life was wrong. And so I went out, I had a big argument with her, and I went out on a winter day in New England to go for a walk. And it had just snowed, and I stepped on a place where there was a patch of ice underneath the snow. And my foot went through the snow and hit the patch of ice, and I my feet shot out from under me and I went boom down on my back and I hit my head, but not enough to knock myself unconscious. And so that was the actual event. And so for about 2 minutes, I say it didn't knock me out of myself. It knocked me into myself. And for about 2 minutes, it was like the lights were on inside me and I saw these things I'd never seen before. And particularly how much grief I had about my father dying, which had happened actually before I was born. My father died when my mother was pregnant with me. And so my whole upbringing was kind of drenched in that grief of not having a father. I mean, it was a big deal because I was the only person in the neighborhood that didn't have a father, believe it or not. In those days, there was people just didn't get divorced in the town I lived anyway. It was Hicktown in Florida. And so I was the only kid in my class that was from a single parent family. How often would that happen today, And
half probably.
This grief that was there about missing out on having known my father. So anyway, I came to, that was one thing, but during that 2 minutes, the really magical thing that happened was I could see and feel that beyond all of those things like fear and anger and sadness and my personality and all of those was what I called pure consciousness. I could see this big, beautiful, shimmering, shining field of awareness that was there. And it's there in everybody. It's not just in me. It's that most of us keep it covered over with worrying and undealt with emotions and everything. So we don't really, it's like we get lost in seeing the stars and forget to look at the space that's beyond those stars. Or we get lost in looking at a yacht on the ocean and forget the ocean that's holding the whole thing. Well, for that 2 minutes, I could see the ocean and see the sky. And it left a permanent impression on me because as I was coming back out of it and realizing, I'm cold. Oh, I'm lying on my back on a frozen road. Oh, I got to walk back a mile to my apartment. Oh, I want a cigarette. Oh, I'm still obese. I was having all of those things. But I had the presence of mind to do this one amazing thing. And I don't know where the idea came from, but I said, I'm going to make a commitment to feeling this way all the time. In other words, I want the lights on all the time. I want to be in touch with that pure, essential consciousness all the time. And I made that declaration. And that's when I got up and I was a very different person because I went back and the first thing I did, instead of, having a cheeseburger or hamburger or whatever, I looked for something I'd never eaten in the refrigerator. And what I found was a package of frozen blueberries, but it was a good sized package, or like a pound of them. And I swear I lived on those blueberries for about 3 days. It was about the only thing I could find that I'd never eaten before. Then I got out to a store and, winter in New Hampshire is not an easy time to chug off to the grocery store because I had about a 30-mile drive into town. So once I got into town and got some stuff to eat, it was much easier. And I started discovering these things like vegetables. Like I'd never eaten an artichoke. I'd never eaten a piece of broccoli. What was the other thing that I started eating and discovered that I loved? Oh, cabbage. Wow. I'd never voluntarily eaten, like steamed cabbage, but I found it absolutely delicious. So I discovered all of these new dimensions of food. And that was an exciting thing. But what was even more exciting was day by day clearing more of the space away so I could feel that pure consciousness all the time. Yeah. And so now, of course, 50 years later, or almost 60 years later now, I've been meditating for 50 years and doing lots of, eating well and exercising and things. So I now have had for the last 50 years or so a healthy body. but it's still a daily practice for me. Always, like today, I'm being taken out for lunch from some people, and there'll be many, many wonderful things there to eat. And it's always such a challenge just to find the most essential thing, without denying myself anything. I'm not into denial of good times or anything.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about this experience. I've had very similar experiences with meditation and psychedelics and working with other teachers. And I'm so impressed you have the ability to somehow witness your ego kind of like putting itself back together. That's the rare consciousness state. What I'm getting a feeling of is you were so out of alignment and so in so much dark space that actually was like a superpower to help you wake up, because maybe there was such a big gap between that darkness and light. Can we start to talk about the upper limit problem and define that for the listeners so we can kind of build from there? So when you say we have an upper limit problem, you said, I got really healthy, and then I walked by the ice cream shop and I decided I needed to unconsciously bring myself back down to a state you were used to, something that was comfortable, something you thought you deserved. Can we kind of start there as we dive deeper?
Well, the upper limit problem is a ceiling you put on your own ability to feel love, success, abundance of money, happiness. So there's self-imposed limits of how good you can feel, how much love you can experience, how wealthy you can be, how happy you can be. And those upper limits often get installed in us before we can think for ourselves. By the time we walk off to kindergarten, we've already osmosized the family values. And maybe they're great family values. Maybe they're family values that say you can have all the love in the world. You can have all the abundance you want to need. You can be as happy as you want to be. But most of the time we get those kind of things stuffed under a whole bunch of negativity. And then it becomes hard to really allow ourselves. It's like we've become allergic to feeling good or allergic to love, because we're afraid that if I feel it, something bad is going to happen. Or if I let myself be financially abundant, something bad is going to happen. So that's the upper limit problem. And probably the most common one, Nick, is the belief that you don't deserve the good things of life for some reason. And the reason is always a good reason, but it's an unconscious reason. It's I can't be my full self because of my skin color, or I can't be my full self because I'm obese, or I can't have my highest potential because I'm the wrong gender. So all of those kinds of things get kind of stuffed in on top of our ability to open up and find out what our true genius is. So what happens, you get here's a classic example. One of the first times I ever noticed this, I was still at Stanford working in the counseling center where I got my PhD way back, probably before you were born. I got my doctorate there in 1974. So in the early 70s.
I'm older than I look, but
well, anyway, I was working in the counseling center there as part of my internship. And the cool thing was we got to work with amazing executives. Those were the early days of Silicon Valley. So all of these places like Intel and Hewlett Packard were right around us. And so they would send their executives over to our counseling center because we were, had a good reputation for being able to work with, kind of high level folks. And so I got to cut my teeth clinically on working with some of the most brilliant people. But here's what I would notice. Like, this is a great example. One of my clients at the time was a highly paid engineer at a high-tech firm, and he was making about $180,000 a year. Great salary for that time. And so one afternoon, Friday afternoon, his boss came in with an envelope and said, that machine you designed for us last year, it's tearing up the market. It's going great. And the board has authorized me to present you with a bonus for your help in designing that machine. And handed him a check. And it was for $180,000. It matched his entire
full
year's
salary.
That's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so now, if he didn't have an upper limit problem, he would drive. In fact, his boss gave him the afternoon. Go home, tell your family about it, take them out to dinner. If he hadn't had an upper limit problem, he would have driven home, said, hey, family, got this great thing. Let's go out and have a celebration, and everybody's happy. But because he had an upper limit problem, by the time he got home, commuting 12 miles, somehow he managed to walk in the door and create the biggest argument he had ever had in 12 or 13 years of marriage with his wife. And his kids got involved, and it turned into this gigantic, messy whole night of family warfare. But the trigger, we could say exactly where that thing got triggered. And so that's what put me on to really starting looking at what is happening just before we mess up, and a lot of what I found in my research is it's not something bad that happens just before we mess up. It's something good that happens. And, you maybe have a communication breakthrough with your partner, and then 20 minutes later, you create a big argument. So that's the symptoms of the upper limit problem. Same thing with inside our minds. Worry thoughts are probably the number one upper limit symptom. That if you find yourself, especially take notice of your worry thoughts and ask yourself, am I worrying about something that I could have any kind of control over?
Yeah.
Because 90% of the time, roughly, we're cranking out thoughts about something that we couldn't possibly do anything about. We have no control over it, no agency. And if you look at the news, which most people do, you're constantly getting fired up about things you have no control over. Yeah. Sometimes you can take action. You can get out your checkbook and write a check for $25 to your favorite candidate that believes something different than you just saw in the news. Great. That's a useful action. But most of the time, boom, 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 we just crank out these worry thoughts, and they don't have any relationship to anything. And it's actually...
It's an addiction. It's an addiction. Is what it
becomes
like.
An addiction.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll tell you, people are so addicted to their worry thoughts. And I've spent, I've had 20,000 sessions with individual clients over the years. So I've had a lot of time to test these ideas out. And one thing I can tell you is that nobody is upset for the reason they think they are. If you think you're upset because your partner chews his or her food too loud, which I've heard right here in this office, if you think that's what's upsetting you, you got a little bit more work to do to find out, of all the possible things in the world, why would I engage in this particular issue? The moment you begin to take responsibility for the conflicts you create and take it out of the blame game, wow, things move very quickly then. You get a lot of growth the moment you quit your addiction to blame.
Yeah. And I find a lot more energy too. Maybe 5 years ago, I was just finding myself constantly worrying about money. And again, that was learned from my family who lost their businesses, and I would see my dad be successful, and that would equal failure. So I had seen that. And one day I just said, you know what if I take all my energy that I'm worrying about making money and I put that energy into making money? And it was this light bulb moment in my career and my life. It has an inflection point since that moment. And I was like, I'm more successful. I have more abundance. And I was like, I was just wasting the energy. And then I was getting more upset and more depressed. And it was just, it was such a funny moment of that's not hard, but putting it into practice is a whole different thing. What are the, there's 4 barriers I know you've talked about in your books. And reading this actually for me just 6 weeks ago has been a complete unlock. These are things that I've known, but I didn't have the language for. And now that I have the language, I could see it. Can you talk about the 4 barriers or the limiting beliefs that trigger these upper limiting problems?
Yes, I mentioned one, which is a deep feeling of unworthiness. You feel like you don't deserve the good things of life. So keep an eye on that one, because so many people have that. And, living near Hollywood, we worked with a lot of big time entertainers and folks that, on the surface, they look like they're in another world, they won a Grammy or an Oscar or whatever. But oftentimes they have a deep sense of unworthiness. So it creates problems for them rather than simply enjoying it. But so a second one, though, is really important, because a lot of people feel that they don't deserve success because it would be burdensome to them. They've seen maybe a successful person in the family who worked all the time but never had time to come to the Little League game, or missed everybody's graduation day, and all those kinds of things. So I've, as you can imagine, I've heard hundreds of different versions of that. And a third one is that a lot of people are afraid of moving and growing and changing because they feel that to do so would be disloyal to people around them or people in their past. It's like I broke my leg a couple of years ago, and I was in a rehab center where I had to have physical therapy for a couple of weeks. I shattered my femur in 7 places. Basically, I had the same accident in a different way than Tiger Woods had, and ended up with the same surgeon to put me back together, because this was the specialist at this particular operation. So I broke my femur in 7 places and shattered my knee. And I had a slip and fall out by my swimming pool on a rainy day, and I just was wearing slick shoes, and I just slipped and went bang down. And anyway, during the rehab part where I was in this rehab center, there was a young man who, on the surface, if he came at you just walking down the street, your first thought would be gangbanger, because he's got tattoos up to here and, had that kind of short, stocky, tattooed look and all that. And, but he was one of my apprentice physical therapists. And one day I asked him, I tell you what I saw. He had a tattoo on his arm that had a quotation from Marcus Aurelius, who was one of my favorite philosophers and a primary thinker in the Stoic realm. And I said, "How on earth did you get this tattoo?" And he said that he had had an enlightenment experience at Thanksgiving dinner, where he realized that every member of his family had either been in prison or was going to prison or was on probation after having been in prison or was heading in that direction, and he himself. And he had this insight at Thanksgiving dinner, and he actually shared it. And it went like this. He said, "Hey, we've just kind of been programmed to think of ourselves that we've got to do this whole thing like be criminals. Why don't we put exactly the same energy into doing something useful?" And now, we would like to think that his family would stand up and say, "That's the greatest idea we have ever heard." They basically threw him out. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to do it anyway." So he stayed away from his family for 6 months ago. He went to junior college out here, and he got, he took one class, which is all he could afford. He took one class, but it was something like, helping people or the helping professions or something. Guess what? Guess who ended up writing him now a letter of recommendation to get into his professional training program in physical therapy? And so I had a great deal of pleasure. He came over to the house and we talked, and I gave him this recommendation. And like the other night, I was watching I don't know if you ever watch any of these true crime stories like 48 Hours or Dateline, but we were watching one of them, and we had the same conversation. We said, these people, these criminals are so smart. If they could just put the same energy into something positive. And so that's why I've told a lot of people that one of the most radical positive things you can ever do for your life is to create one positive thought about something that hasn't worked for you in the past. Like, I was reading a person this morning that was getting married for the 7th time. That's the, I think the saying is that it's the hope over experience, that you have this last hope. But so let's say you've been married 7 times and it hasn't worked out. Well, to create one new positive thought, like, I can be happily married for as long as I want. Some new positive thought like that takes you out of the realm of the old programming and gives you a brand new start. That's why I tell everybody around here to think of your personal growth as being like the automatic pilot on an airplane. Give it a commitment, give it a direction. But the automatic pilot on an airplane, it takes off from New York and it's bound for LA, but it doesn't get there in one straight line. In fact, it gets there, it wanders off course every second and then gets a little corrective message and goes back the other direction. And then there's a little up and then it says, we're going a little up, let's go down. And so thousands of times a minute, it drifts off of its original commitment and then recommits and gets back onto the track again. So my point is that you give it a commitment and then you get willing to make your recommitment when you inevitably drift off. And, like when I used to work with a lot of people with weight loss, after my big weight loss, I worked with people for years and years and years on weight loss. And what would happen was they would go on a diet and they would have 3 good days on the diet and start to feel some success. And then somebody would offer them a stick of gum at work. So they'd put in a stick of gum. Oh, I've blown my diet. So then they'd go out at lunch and eat a triple cheeseburger, and then, I've blown my diet and eat a giant dinner. And so, but we don't need to do it that way. We can make minute correction. Oh, okay, I'm slipping off the course. Let me recommit to what I'm really, really wanting. And so I always tell people that the automatic pilot gets you to your destination by being wrong 99% of the time, because it has that superpower of willingness to, I'm making a mistake, let me correct. Oh, I'm making a mistake, let me correct. So to catch it early rather than having to wait for the gigantic blow-ups in life.
Yeah, and the piece there around commitment, and when I read that in one of your books, you said something like, commitment is free, but something else costs you everything. And it was what was the line? Commitment's free, but the discipline costs you everything. I'm missing the last word there.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. Have you ever played a sport, like a team sport? Well, I was a athletically unskilled member of the Leesburg High School Yellow Jackets football team. And I'm big, at the time I was 6'2", 225 pounds at the time I was in high school. And so even though I didn't have much skill, I went out for football because I thought that was the best way to get the girls and that kind of thing. And it turned out to work marvelously well, but I spent most of my time sitting on the bench. But there was this one moment where Coach Smith looked down the bench and said, "Hendricks, 67, you're in the game." Oh, man, that was so different. It's one thing being for a team sitting on the bench, but it's one of the other things to be a person that the other people are cheering for, that you're on the field, you're in the big commitment then. And so it changes everything to the moment you act on a commitment. And so that experience is so delicious, being engaged on a worthwhile project. That is one of the most delicious things in life. I like to think that if you think of, somebody was telling me the other day to look at your personal growth as like the four burners on a stove, that there's four important burners to cook on. There's work, there's health, there's family, there's friends. And this person that told me this, apparently some research indicates that successful people usually leave one burner off or don't tend it. Very successful people often don't do two burners. In other words, they put all of their attention into success or health or whatever it is. And boy, that kind of said something to me, because I was one of those people that, like, during my big years of success, when we were doing the whole Oprah thing and, thousands of people were coming to our seminars and that kind of thing, that was really fun and interesting and everything. But I wouldn't want to do it again in a million years, because I put so many other things to the side, like friendships and certain extent to my extended family. I was just so focused on that. And I think life has a way of teaching us to be more balanced. Yeah. And now for the last 25 years, I've been really focused on doing only things that I most love to do and only things that I feel make my biggest contribution to the world. So I really haven't had any time where I felt like I wasn't doing my genius zone work. But before then, there were times when I'd get stuck in a business relationship with somebody that ate up a lot of energy. And I mean, in a business context, bad hires or bad friendships, they tend to take a lot of time to get extricated from. And but having been extricated for the last 25 years, I can tell you that living in your genius zone is the most delicious thing, because I'm focused all day long on doing the things I most love to do and doing the things I'm uniquely suited to do and make my biggest contribution. And it took me a lot of work to get to that place. But boy, for the last 25 or 30 years since I've been living in my genius zone, I mean, it's the best thing in the world, because when I wake up in the morning, I feel juiced. I want to be here. I want to participate plugged in life.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. I started writing a book, and part of that is from reading your books and getting out of my own way. And I was writing about watering the 4 different gardens, and I talk about health, wealth, peace, and happiness as those 4. And I've noticed I tend to water certain areas, and then when I don't, the other parts of me start to die or their weeds grow. And to consciously start to balance all of that, it's been a wonderful experience and challenging, but accessible. And so we've talked about the upper limit problem. We talked about the barriers. And then now we've started to talk about the zones, understanding that there's a difference between, was it incompetence, your competence, your excellence, and your genius. Can you talk about those 4? Because I think people are going to be surprised at which one they get stuck in the most, actually, after hearing you talk about this.
Yes. Well, if you think of what you do in your daily life, how you spend your 15 or 18 hours or however many hours you're awake and moving around in the world, you'll find that you're in one of 4 zones. Sometimes you're doing things that are in your zone of incompetence, where you're doing things you don't like to do and you're not particularly good at. And my classic example that I think I wrote about in The Big Leap was, one day I found myself many years ago standing in line at the post office trying to mail a package, and there was about 15 people ahead of me in the line, and it wasn't going anywhere because there was one clerk taking care of everybody there. And it was the line, I spent 15 minutes just moving up in that line. And I had this big awareness. At the time, I charged $1,000 an hour for my coaching services.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I had just burnt $250 worth of my precious time
Mm-hmm.
hanging around in a mail line doing something I didn't even want to do, and somebody else could have done 10 times better. So that was my last day of doing anything like that. I went back and I just eliminated everything from my zone of incompetence. So I haven't had to do anything like that in so many years I can't even remember. So number 2 zone that people get stuck in is their zone of competence, where you're doing something you're good at, you can do it, but somebody else could do it just as well. So you want to avoid the zone of competence because you can be easily replaced in that. Now, here's the tricky place. Sometimes, hopefully a lot of times, you're spending a lot of your day in your zone of excellence, where you're doing things that you're good at. You're probably better than most people at them. You get paid for doing them. You get attaboy, attagirl, good boy. And you get approval from everybody for being in your zone of excellence. You get elected chairman, you get elected head of the committee, and all of those kind of things. And so at a certain point, though, and I know this because I've worked now with, I think, something like 1,800 executives from different firms over the past 50 years. And so where executives, particularly high-functioning people, get stuck is in their zone of excellence, because they're doing things that they're good at and everybody's appreciating them and giving them more money for it and everything. But the drawback is if you stay too long in your zone of excellence, you're not giving attention to this 4th zone that I call your genius zone. And that's where you're doing what you most love to do, what you're uniquely suited to do. And it's also what makes your biggest contribution. So early on, I learned, for example, I was running a halfway house for juvenile delinquents just before I went back to Stanford to get my doctorate in counseling psychology. I was running a halfway house, and I got fired from it. And I got fired because I was a terrible administrator. I was good clinically with the kids, but as far as telling other people what to do and telling the secretary what, I just didn't function that way. I wasn't good at laying out people's schedules for them and that kind of thing. And so gradually it became untenable for me to keep doing that. And I basically said, you've got to get somebody here who knows how to do that, because that's not my area of skill. And they said, you're right, you're fine.
Sounds good.
I wasn't quite expecting that, but it worked out to be a great gift too, because I went back and I got my doctorate and started doing what I most love to do. So it had a happy ending in my particular case. But a lot of times we get, we arrange to get busted in our zone of excellence because we don't want to stay there. There's a calling that people feel. That's a calling, what I call your call to genius. It's part of you that wants to make your biggest contribution. You're not going to, oh boy. I just had the experience. This goes into a darker place, I think, but if you feel okay going there, I just was at the deathbed of a good friend of mine. He's been a good friend and golf buddy for 20 years. And his death came about in a kind of a sudden way, because 2 weeks before it, he was sitting in my kitchen drinking a cup of coffee and talking about our golf match, and then 2 weeks later, I was being called to his deathbed. And it was very moving, because no matter how conscious we are and how much of a life we've lived, there's always things that people, if they're conscious, they have regrets about. And I could tell that he had certain regrets of things that were in his genius zone that he had never really gotten around to energize.
Yeah.
And that left a big impression on me. And I've had that experience other times too, but it made me deeply, deeply committed once again to helping people find out what I call your deathbed goals. You know, if you're on your deathbed and I said, Nick, has your life been a success? And you said, yes, it has been a success.
I would say I was happy. I was happy and my life had value. Like I was reading that the other day and that came through. Those two things, like I was of service and I enjoyed it and I was happy.
I was happy and my life had value. I was of service to other people. See, those are deathbed goals, because if you have met those, like for me, I had 5 deathbed goals that I made when I was 34 years old. And they pretty much stood me my whole life. Number 1 was I wanted to have an experience of a transcendental experience of life. I wanted to be in life. I wanted to participate so much. I wanted to love my life. And so a number 1 goal for me was to live a life of passion. And the second thing was to live in a state of completion, where there was nothing I hadn't said to important people in my life, and nothing I hadn't expressed that was important to me. So to live in completion. A third thing I wanted to learn how to do, I wanted to learn how to write from my heart, because when I was 34, I'd had just a glimmer of writing a new kind of book, like The Big Leap, which was many years away, or our book that we eventually launched on Oprah called Conscious Loving. It was a book about relationships, and still to this day, one of our most important works. And so if you've got something inside you that you need to get out, that's what I was talking about, learning how to do it from your heart.
A quick reflection. When I read The Big Leap, I felt it. When I read The Genius Zone, I felt your soul coming through the words in a very, very tangible way. And I could feel the source consciousness you were pulling in and coming through as I was reading those words. So I just want to reflect that. As a reader, I felt exactly what you were trying to create as this deathbed goal. And it was beyond moving. It was like I was talking to myself or God.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that very much, because as a writer, it took me years and years and years to learn how to write like that. You know, to write from my heart, from my soul, to keep the ideas so pure and simple that I have been able to explain them to the junior high kids that used to go to the junior high school over near where I live. But my goal was to be able to write a book on the New York Times bestseller list that I could explain to a junior high school kid. And if I could do that, that felt good. The other couple of goals that I had are goals that, like, one of them is to really savor the moments of my life, to not miss a sunset or not miss a moment of being able to talk for 10 seconds with Katie while she's going out the door, to be able to have a connection with her. So to be able to focus on the important things of life. And my new memoir that just came out, called Loving Life, interestingly enough, when I first conceived it, I was going to call it Savoring Life, because of the importance of savoring to me. But I mentioned the title of it to a good friend of mine who's been a friend for half my life, Kenny Loggins, a great songwriter and singer. And we used to be neighbors when we lived over in Santa Barbara. And I tried out the title on Kenny. I said, how about Savoring Life? What do you think about that? And he thought about it for a moment, and he said, well, why not just call it Loving Life? He said, that's what you've been up to for the last 50 years that I've known you. And, so I said, okay, Loving Life it is. So that's what's been on my mind, is that savoring of it, to
Yeah.
not miss the juiciness of it. And the fifth thing that I really wanted was I want to be able to be in touch with the creator force in life. I think it's a miracle that we are created as human beings. I can say, wow, I came from the same material that everything else in the universe is made out of. So that's a good feeling, a feeling of being at one with the entire universe. But I also, like lots of other people, want to know who's running this show. Where's the creator force coming from? Mm-hmm. God, spirit. And so I wanted to know as much as I'm humanly capable of about that. And so that's been a big thing. And I don't know, I can't claim to speak for God anymore, but I can certainly feel the presence of that spirit and that creator force at work. And I think anybody can who begins this journey that you and I have been on. You are obviously committed to being in your genius zone. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be able to talk to me about mine. Yeah, and so totally. That's a good thing for you. And the more you keep opening up to being in your genius zone, the more you will attract other people that keep you there and show you how to stay there and can help support your journey there.
Yeah, I can feel that so much, and I appreciate that reflection, and like attracts like. And there's been something interesting that's been happening internally from reading your book. So I identified one of my main saboteurs was not wanting to leave other people behind through my own success. So this like reverse abandonment kind of thing. And I was like, now that I have the language, I can see it. So I've decided to break through and keep going, and now on what you call the upward spiral. And I've started doing the ultimate success mantra, which I think the beauty in there is the pauses in between. But what I've noticed that started to come in, and I think this is a relevant question, is the crosstalk of, can I maintain this? Like, when is the shoe gonna drop? How long until I drop back down into a lower state? So it's been really cool to experience everything we've talked about. Can you shed some insight, selfishly for me and also from the other listeners who've got some similar things they may be working through?
Well, I appreciate you putting a highlight under the thing about reverse abandonment, because a lot of times people feel it's them being abandoned, but a lot of time what keeps us stuck is our not willing to abandon or let go or have a relationship changed that was important to us in the past. And so that keeps us stuck. But what I think that ultimately gets us free is that commitment to living in our own genius zone. And that's going to come with whatever your barriers are. Like, one of your limiting beliefs is, like many people, I can't feel this good all the time. I can't have life work. There's got to be a shoe that drops and suddenly, And so just expect that something's going to trip you up, and then get willing to recommit again. Like, I have a couple of physical issues. I'm 81 years old, and I have a physical issue called macular degeneration, which is a thing where my eyes are getting aging spots on them, basically, where certain parts of my vision are getting blurry. And I'm getting treatment for that. And so I'm doing everything that I can do. But part of life also has to do with the acceptance, learning how to be with changes, and nowhere better than when your body begins to change. Because I didn't wake up one day and said, I think I'll have my macula start degenerating. It's just something that happens as a result of being past my sell-by date. And so the lifespan is 79.4, I think, for males in my category. And here I am a couple years past my expiration date and still having a good time doing it. And
so with house money.
I'm going to occasionally feel like, oh my gosh, this, is somebody going to catch me feeling this good? And so expect the upper limit problem to come in, and they won't bug you as much when they do.
Yeah, this is part of the game. It's part of the up leveling, and I love the piece you talked about of recommitting. I actually own a couple gyms, and I see it so much. People lose 30 pounds, and then they lose 31 pounds, and they quit. You never see them again, and it's like they're like, "Oh, I missed a workout." Oh, just recommit in a way that's simple and small and tangible, digestible. It doesn't have to be as hard as we make it. But I love that piece about recommitting. If that feels like part of the secret sauce to continually elevating into higher states.
Well, I think it's also really important. Like, I didn't start resistance training, lifting weights and all that till I was 65 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, obviously now I wish I'd started when I was 17 years old, but I started, and I do 3 days a week of resistance training at a gym with the same trainer I've been with now for 14 years, 3 days a week. And the amount of good feeling in my body that kind of training produces, I would not have believed it if somebody told me that. That when I was 65, if they could say, after 14 years at 81, or whatever it is now, you're going to be feeling better than you've ever felt in your life.
It's real.
It's real.
It's real. It's real.
And nobody believes it, but I'm an ambassador for it now. But you know what, Nick? It really does have a lot to do with commitment, because, people have asked me, haven't you ever thought about quitting? You've been doing this 3 days a week and for 14, 15 years now. And boy, why would I quit eating? Or why would I quit taking a shower because it feels so good? Oh, I took a great shower today. I guess I don't ever have to do that again. It's commitment. You keep coming back time after time, and then you lose the commitment. Then you got to keep back again. It's that automatic pilot, get that thing into your head that it's okay to drift off. Just make sure you recommit.
And how interesting that then we get projections from other people who are uncomfortable with our own growth or acceleration. Hey, you're shining a little too bright at 80. You shouldn't be doing that. It's so interesting that you living your life to the fullest can actually trigger someone else's insecurity. And then we've got to learn to live in our own right action and confidence. And hey, this is what's right for me, and continue to move forward. Those are tough things where I struggle with that too. And I just love that you're exemplifying, being mindful, being healthy, being wealthy, successful. And as an example, you can do all those things together. I think there's a lot of pictures that you can only do one of those. You can only be successful, but you can't be healthy, or, vice versa. And it's like, no, you can have your cake and eat it too, is really what I'm hearing from you, Gay, about your whole entire life. Yeah.
Well, you can be the source of where all the cake comes from. That's even the better news. Once you open up and embrace the wholeness that you are a member of this universe, you have a right to be here. You're a perfectly designed member, just like everybody else is, made of the same exact ingredients. From that place of wholeness, it becomes much easier to create a life that you really want to live, because you're saying, okay, how can I have more of this? How can I have more doing more of what I love? How can I have more of doing what I feel is my biggest contribution? Once you're still wondering about that, it's life becomes much more peaceful and easy and thrilling, actually.
Yeah. And I find that the great part is then you get to inspire other people to try to do that as well. And I don't find any better drug than seeing someone else light up and go, whoa, you did it. Okay, maybe I can do it. And they start to lose weight, or they start to focus on their goals or their mindfulness, and you see them grow, and that becomes this ripple that spreads out into the entire universe. And it's like, oh, all I had to do was focus on my own genius and let spread out. It actually takes a lot of pressure off it for me personally. There's nothing I have to do outside.
Well, that's so beautiful to know, because, like imagine if you're standing in the radiance of enlightenment, you're facing the sun. It's just, that's great for a moment. But what really makes a difference is if you turn around and let the sun be reflected on the faces of everybody you see. You're feeling it, and you're seeing it out here. That's an even sweeter spot to be in, because then you're not only being embraced by the wholeness of life, but you're seeing it on the faces of other people too. You're seeing their light.
Yeah. And then what a beautiful place and space to live in. And we have access to that. And I just really appreciate you sharing this. And I hope the people listening are going, wow, maybe I can have some of this too. Yeah. Gay, anything you'd like to, kind of bring us in for a landing with? Any last insights before we sign off, or anything you want the listeners to know about?
Well, one thing for sure is I've spent the last few months working with a really bright, genius guy from MIT named Steve Ray. And we've created a coach's portal where we've taken all of our 900-page training manuals and all of our 200 videos and all of our training materials and put them inside a AI silo, so to speak, called the coach's portal. And so if you go to hendricks.com, you can see a way to check out the coach's portal, and you can try it, and you can talk to me and Katie actually in our voices, or you can have text. But you could ask it, let's say you've got a client coming in and the client has anxiety and you haven't worked with that particular issue. So you could say, hey, Gay, or hey, Katie, I've got a client coming in with anxiety. What are a couple of things I absolutely need to do from the very beginning? And then you can have us talk to you about what we know about treating that particular issue and how to deal with it. So it's a good, easy way to get connected with us. We want you to buy the books too, of course.
Yeah.
So you always have it on your bookshelf. Excellent.
That's really cool. I'll check that out myself for the clients I work with. There's always something new that comes up, right? It's like, what do I do here? So, well, Gay, thanks so much. It's been incredible to read your books and chat and get to know you. And for everyone listening, we don't advertise on the show. All we ask is that if this resonated with you, share it with your friends, your family, and help spread the conscious message that we are here doing at the Wellness Lab. So, Gay, thanks so much for your time, your energy, your presence, and I truly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Thank you for living in your genius zone.
My pleasure.